In a city where dinner is sacred and danger never knocks politely, one strange note sends Nero Wolfe's orderly world into delicious chaos. Settle in, mystery lover, and tell me, where in the world are you listening from tonight? Subscribe so you never miss upcoming mysteries. Nero Wolfe and the dinner Fritz refused to serve. At 7:58 p.m. on a Thursday that had no business being dramatic, I realized something was off when Fritz Brenner, high priest of the kitchen and protector of the sacred 8 o'clock ritual, stood frozen in the dining room archway clutching a soup tureen like it had just declared war on Switzerland. If Fritz hesitated, even for a breath, when it came to serving dinner, it meant the universe was tilting, the stars were flickering, and somebody somewhere had done something very, very stupid. Wolfe was at the head of the table, ensconced like a monarch surveying a kingdom of silverware and linen napkins. The dining room glowed with the soft amber of the chandelier, the polished mahogany table gleaming so perfectly Fritz would have had a stroke if a fingerprint dared show itself. But the seat opposite Wolfe, my seat, was empty except for a place setting that waited with the same foreboding patience as a priest before a last confession. Fritz didn't move, not a blink, not a swallow, just a man holding dinner hostage. Wolfe's brow descended half an inch, his personal equivalent of a ballistic meltdown. "Fritz," he said, his tone the temperature of glacial granite, "the hour approaches." Fritz swallowed. It was audible, and that alone told me we were in deeper trouble than a cook with stage fright. "Mr. Wolfe, I cannot serve it." Wolfe's eyes, black as midnight ink and twice as unforgiving, shifted to me. "Archie, what is this?" I held up both hands. "Don't look at me. I didn't steal the soul, Veronique." Fritz sucked in air. "It is not the soul, Mr. Goodwin. The soul is perfect, very perfect, but—" His voice cracked, something I'd only heard once before, the week he discovered we were out of imported white truffle. "But what?" Wolfe growled. Fritz stepped forward as though approaching a firing squad and placed the tureen on the side table. His hands were trembling, and Fritz's hands don't tremble unless someone tampered with ingredients or sanity. "A note," he said. "A threat. To me." That stopped Wolfe cold. It stopped me, too. "What kind of threat?" I asked. Without answering, Fritz reached into the pocket of his immaculate white coat and extracted a folded slip of paper. He handled it like it was coated in anthrax. He offered it to Wolfe, but Wolfe, who never touched anything that might contain germs, dust, or emotional content, crooked a finger at me. "Archie." Because of course. I stepped over, took the note and unfolded it. The handwriting looked like someone had dipped a spider in ink and convinced it to dance a jitterbug. But the message was clear enough. "Do not serve dinner. The next dish will be your last." Charming. If Hallmark ever needed a threatening culinary division, this was their man. I read it twice, then angled it toward the light. A tiny fleck of reddish gold clung to the tape at the top edge. Saffron. High grade. Maybe Kashmiri. Maybe Spanish. Either way, the good stuff. Too good for a 2-bit crank scribbling death notes. "This was shoved under my kitchen window at 7, Fritz whispered. "Under the sill. I heard nothing. I saw nothing. But I found it on the tile." Wolfe didn't like violence. He tolerated crimes the way a cat tolerates thunderstorms, resentfully and with indigestion. But violence in proximity to the brownstone, and specifically directed at his household, that ignited something colder than anger. "Phooey," Wolfe murmured, which was practically an explosion. I said, "Some crank from a rival cookbook club, a jealous sous chef ready to commit murder by starvation." "It is no joke, Archie." Fritz placed a hand over the back of a dining chair, steadying himself. "I have never been threatened." I couldn't resist. "Maybe someone tasted your pickled cod experiment and swore revenge." Fritz shot me a look that would have curdled gravy. Fine. Maybe not the moment. Wolfe held out his hand, not for the note, but to command silence. "Someone is attempting to meddle with my dinner," he said, enunciating each syllable with surgical disdain. "This is unconscionable." "I thought the part about threatening Fritz was worse," I said. "That as well," Wolfe allowed. "Give me that." I brought the note over. Wolfe didn't touch it. He leaned in just enough to examine the handwriting and the saffron fleck with a scowl fierce enough to season a pot roast. "Archie," he said, "secure the kitchen windows, all of them." Of course he'd pick me, Why send a private detective to chase killers when you can send him to check window latches like a union carpenter? Right now, I asked. Because it's almost 8 and your trout— Confound the trout. Wolfe slapped the table. Silverware rattled. Fritz flinched. A malignant idiot intrudes upon our domestic tranquility. Go. It wasn't often I got sent on household defence detail, but when Wolfe gave orders in that tone, you didn't debate, you saluted. I stepped out of the dining room and headed for the kitchen, which still smelled like sautéed miracles waiting to happen. The back windows were shut tight, latched properly, no tampering visible. I checked the sill and found only a faint smudge on the exterior edge. Maybe dirt, maybe something brushed there when the note was slid under. The alley behind the brownstone was quiet except for a cat perched on a trash can, staring like it was waiting for me to do something worth reporting to Kramer. I made a full sweep, found nothing else, and returned to the dining room where Wolfe and Fritz stood in the same positions, frozen like someone had paused the world. No broken latches, I reported, no footprints, unless the cat belongs to an assassin. This is intolerable. Wolfe pushed himself up, slowly but with purpose. For him, rising before 8 p.m. dinner without being pried loose by a crane was practically an act of war. We will address this in the office. Fritz wrung his hands. The trout will keep, Wolfe said. Then softer. Fritz, compose yourself. You're in no danger while in this house. That was Wolfe's way of telling him he cared. If you weren't fluent in Wolfe, you'd miss it. We moved to the office, the familiar sense of leather chairs, polished wood, and Wolfe's books wrapped around us like a heavy, comfortable blanket. I shut the door behind us and took the note to my desk. From the drawer, I pulled a clean envelope, slid the note inside, and labelled it in pencil. Wolfe lowered himself into his chair with a sigh that could have been mistaken for resignation if you didn't know him. I knew better. That was the sigh before the storm. Describe the saffron fleck, he said. I did. Wolfe nodded. Saffron of quality is not common. It is expensive. It suggests access. To what? I asked. Spices? Fancy kitchens? Culinary relatives of the mafia? Do not be absurd. Wolfe steepled his fingers. It suggests a milieu. Bless you. The sender is no casual malefactor. He moves in circles where saffron is used with familiarity, gourmet societies, extravagant restaurants, private culinary clubs where pretension is currency. Sounds like a party, I said. Maybe they have a buffet. Archie, he warned. I straightened. Fine. So someone from a food snob circle tries to scare Fritz. Why? To prevent him from serving dinner. That part I got. But why? What's the motive? Dieting jihad? Wolfe closed his eyes. Food is power. Influence. Prestige. A threatened dinner is a threatened hierarchy. I made a note of that. It would look great in my memoirs. Fritz approached the doorway, twisting his hands again. Mr. Wolfe, I hate to delay your meal. You are not to consider that, Wolfe said sharply. Your safety precedes my dinner. I swear Fritz swayed a little. Wolfe didn't hand out emotional comfort like candy. When he did, it hit harder than garlic in a small kitchen. I said, Do you want me to call Kramer? Send the note over. Let him chew on saffron flakes? No, Wolfe opened his eyes. Not yet. The police would seize upon irrelevancies. We will first deduce the significance of this intrusion. Fair enough, I said. But you'll want to see this. I brought the envelope over and set it on his desk blotter, careful not to touch the blotter directly because that was a shortcut to unemployment. Wolfe grunted, which, in his dialect, meant he was thinking. I waited. Wolfe thinking was like watching a mountain decide whether to erupt. At length he said, This house is inviolate. Someone sought to pierce that inviolate boundary. Whether as a warning or as prelude to some grotesque action, I cannot ignore it. You want me to patrol the alley all night? I asked. Because if so, I need hazard pay and a warmer coat. No, you will return to your desk. Wolfe opened his eyes dark and sharp. I require you alert, not frozen. That was his version of protectiveness. Again, you had to decode it. I sat. I waited. Wolfe looked at the envelope again, then at me, and finally said quietly, with a weight that made Fritz inhale audibly, If someone threatens my cook, Mr. Goodwin, they threaten me. And just like that, the case began. The morning sunlight in Wolfe's office hit the globe like it was trying to interrogate it, but the only thing in that room under actual duress at 10:07 a.m. was me, specifically my right ear, which was being punished by the shrillest voice Manhattan's culinary world had to offer. Some men start the morning with coffee. I get Garrison Hud. "Mr. Goodwin, I cannot overstate the gravity," he yelped through the receiver. "The umami profile of last night's tasting banquet was catastrophically—" "Mr. Hud," I cut in, pinching the bridge of my nose, "if you use the phrase umami profile again, I'll have to charge you extra for emotional damage. This is no laughing matter." "Trust me," I said. "I lost the ability this morning." Behind me, Wolfe made a sound halfway between a growl and a sigh. He had just lowered himself into the big chair with a freshly chilled glass of beer, because it was past noon now, and Wolfe's internal clock obeyed no mortal calendar, only ritual. The beer glinted golden beneath the office lights, and Wolfe lifted it with the reverence of a priest handling sacramental wine. I rotated the chair slightly to face him. He gave me one of his looks. No eyebrows raised, no glare, just a small tightening of the corners of the eyes. Translation: stop the idiocy and get to the meat. "All right, Hud," I said. "Start again. Slowly." "The chef," he said breathlessly. "He's missing." That got Wolfe's attention. Not enough to stop him from lifting the beer, but his grip paused a quarter inch before the rim touched his lips. "Which chef?" I asked. "There are about 47 in this city who consider themselves indispensable." "Raoul Dervin," Hud barked the name like he expected me to swoon. I didn't swoon, but my eyebrows did take a field trip north. Even a guy like me who doesn't spend his nights reading Gastronomic Gazette knew Dervin by reputation. The man was a culinary tyrant with a palate so refined he allegedly once rejected an entire barrel of saffron for being melancholic. Anyone who could emotionally evaluate spice strands was either a genius or a lunatic. "Missing?" I repeated. "Yes. He was at the club last night for the tasting banquet. He supervised the entire preparation. He was seen arguing, well, loudly disagreeing with 3 people. Then he left the kitchen in a state of furious agitation. He hasn't been seen since." "Sounds like my date last Saturday," I said. "Without the tasting banquet." "Goodwin," Hud snapped. "This is a crisis. The Manhattan Epicurean Circle depends on him. Our reputation depends on him. And Fritz Brenner is associated with our society. He occasionally consults for us. There is concern." I stiffened. The brownstone's air suddenly felt colder. Wolfe met my gaze over the beer glass. Slow, intentional, and he didn't take that sip. "Go on," I said, my voice lower. "Concern about what?" "That there may be danger," Hud whispered, "to anyone linked to the club." The words floated into the office like a draft under the back door. Danger connected to a gourmet club didn't sound like much, unless, of course, someone had threatened our own live-in miracle worker 12 hours earlier. I glanced at Wolfe. He was still staring at the beer like it was the Oracle of Delphi, but his eyes had turned inward, calculating. "What do you want from us?" I asked Hud. "I want Mr. Wolfe to investigate, to locate Dervin, discreetly, quickly, and, if necessary, to prevent scandal." "Scandal gives me hives," I said. "We charge extra for antihistamines." Hud ignored me. "Mr. Goodwin, you know his reputation. If anything has happened to him, the consequences for our organization—" "Right," I said. "Stay put. I'll discuss it with Mr. Wolfe." I hung up and rotated my chair to face the boss. "Trouble?" Wolfe asked, voice already as heavy as a law book. "You could say that," I said. "Chef Raoul Dervin went missing last night after a gourmet tantrum at the Manhattan Epicurean Circle." Wolfe's eyelids flicked. "And," I added casually, watching him like a hawk, "his signature dish for the tasting banquet was saffron risotto." That did it. The beer froze halfway to his lips again. Wolfe's eyes narrowed, just barely, but enough for me to see the shift, a mental gear locking into place. "Describe the call," he said. I did. Every word. Every ounce of Hud's panic. Every hint of fear about the club's reputation, and most importantly, the line about Fritz being connected. When I finished, Wolfe inhaled slowly. He set the beer down, a sacrilege he only committed when the world was cracking open. His fingers pressed together in that steeple he uses when he's annoyed, intrigued, or planning to dismantle someone's life. "Fritz," Wolfe murmured, does not deserve this." "That's what I said," I replied. Well, not out loud, but the sentiment was there. "Bring him." I rang the bell cord. Fritz arrived 30 seconds later, wiping his hands on a spotless towel even though they were clean enough to operate on royalty. "Yes, sir?" Fritz asked, voice steadier than it had been last night, but still etched with worry. "Fritz," Wolfe said, "be seated." That alone told you how serious things were. Fritz never sat in the office unless someone was dead, dying, or threatening to ruin dinner. He perched on the edge of the red chair like it might bite. "Mr. Brenner," Wolfe said with formal gravity, "your safety is my obligation. If there is even a remote association between you and this missing chef, I must be informed of every detail of your involvement with that club." Fritz's eyes shimmered. I'd seen the man cry exactly twice, once when he broke his grandmother's copper kettle, and once when Wolfe complimented his veal roulade. This was close to a third. "I have done nothing improper," Fritz said. "I consult, occasionally. I demonstrate techniques. I offer advice. That is all." "And Devan?" Wolfe pressed. "I have met him," Fritz said. "Once, briefly. He is a perfectionist, yes, but he was polite. He watched me prepare beurre blanc and said nothing except that my reduction was nearly admirable." "That," I said, "is a compliment of staggering magnitude coming from him." Fritz nodded miserably. Wolfe cleared his throat. "Mr. Goodwin has informed me of the chef's disappearance. I am inclined to accept an inquiry." "You will help?" Fritz asked. "I will," Wolfe said. "If someone has threatened you in connection to this gastronomical melodrama," he practically spit the words, "I must intervene." That was Wolfe's version of a hug. Fritz heard it. His shoulders eased half an inch. I said, "Hud will pay well, very well." Wolfe scowled. He'd better. I gave him the number Hud had offered. Wolfe blinked. A slow blink. Then, "Very well. Accept." I dialed Hud back. He picked up so fast I suspected he'd been crouching on the receiver like a heron. "Mr. Hud," I said, "Nero Wolfe will take your case." "Oh, thank heavens. But," I added, "there will be a retainer. A large one." "Whatever he requires," I quoted the number. Hud choked once, loudly, like someone had slipped a bone into his foie gras, but he agreed. We arranged for the check to be messengered within the hour. I hung up and turned back to Wolfe. He was already reaching for his beer now that the crisis had structure. "Archie," he said, "you will visit the Manhattan Epicurean Circle, inquire discreetly, retrieve first-hand accounts of this alleged argument, speak to the rival chef, the wealthy patron, and the treasurer. And if they don't want to talk," he closed his eyes wearily, "use your ingenuity. That's why you keep me around." "No," Wolfe said, "I keep you around because you are indispensable and insufferable in equal measure." I grinned. "That's practically a sonnet." He opened one eye. "Go." It was 11:05 a.m., a terrible time to request my presence anywhere outside the brownstone, because it gave me exactly 55 minutes before orchid hours. If I wasn't out the door before 11:30, Wolfe would barricade me with a glare and remind me the greenhouse was a sanctuary, not a subway station. I grabbed my hat from the rack. "You'll be careful," Wolfe said suddenly. I stopped mid-step. Wolfe didn't do sentimental, and he certainly didn't do concern, not out loud. "Always am," I said lightly. "Good," he muttered. "Idiocy is not required today." I opened the door. "Oh, Archie," Wolfe added without looking up. "Yes, sir?" "Do not accept any food." He paused, then clarified with regal disdain. "From amateurs." I saluted. "My stomach thanks you." As I headed down the hall toward the front door, I heard Fritz murmur to Wolfe in a trembling voice, "Thank you, sir." And Wolfe's quiet reply, "Nonsense. You are essential." That, right there, told me the stakes had just gone from saffron to blood. I stepped into the crisp Manhattan morning, the city's clatter greeting me like a starting gun. The Manhattan Epicurean Circle was waiting, and if gourmet egos were involved, somebody was bound to be wielding a knife, metaphorical or otherwise. I tipped my hat, squared my shoulders, and walked toward the curb. Legwork awaited, and Wolfe's parting words echoed behind me. Gastronomical melodrama. Too late now. I was in it. The Manhattan Epicurean Circle looked like the kind of place where people argued about truffle grades the way sane people argue about baseball, and the moment I stepped through its double-glass doors, I could smell the money, the polish, and the nervous sweat of people with too much to hide. The foyer alone had enough velvet drapery to curtain a minor opera, and the lighting was a soft, flattering gold that made even my fedora look like it belonged on a magazine cover. If gourmands ever built a cathedral, this was the blueprint. A woman in a slate-grey dress intercepted me before I took 5 steps. Paige Selwood, PR director. She was tall, sleek, and had eyes that flickered like she'd swallowed a secret, and it was trying to escape. "Mr. Goodwin?" she asked, offering her hand. "You're with Mr. Wolfe?" "That's right," I said, shaking it. She wore perfume that seemed to whisper controlled panic. "We weren't expecting you quite this early," she continued. "I find promptness disarms people," I told her. "Also, I skipped breakfast." She gave a quick smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Then I'll try not to delay you too long." She led me down a carpeted corridor lined with mirrors polished so brightly I could see my own skepticism. Staff floated past silently, waiters with the posture of ballet dancers, porters balancing trays like crown jewels, and one sous chef carrying a pot like it might explode if jostled. "The dining room," Paige said, sweeping aside a thick curtain, "is where Mr. Dervain oversaw the tasting last night." The room beyond was a gleaming temple of culinary pretension, long tables draped in white linen, silver cloches lined like soldiers, crystal glasses arranged in strict formation. If the place had a pulse, it beat to the rhythm of 3-star panic. Paige gestured toward a side station. The kitchen staff reconstructed the layout exactly. "Very thoughtful," I said. "Dead chefs appreciate accuracy." She dropped her gaze. "Mr. Goodwin, I hope this resolves quickly." "That depends," I replied, "on how many people felt like watching a genius blow a gasket." Paige stiffened. Panic again, dressed in silk. "Who argued with him?" I asked gently. She swallowed. "Marco Filari, Edwin Kellner, and Mrs. Lenora Dale." "All right, let's go shopping." Marco Filari was a narrow man with broad ambition. His moustache was so waxed and curled it looked like it had its own moral code, and he wore a chef's jacket so crisp I suspected he sent it out to be ironed between thoughts. "Mr. Goodwin," he said, voice dripping olive oil. "I'm Marco." "I see that," I replied. "Congratulations." He scowled, which improved his face by at least 15%. "I understand you had a disagreement with Raoul Dervin last night," I said. "I did not disagree," Filari snapped. I corrected him. His sauce was ruined. "Ruined?" I lifted a brow. "That's a heavy word." "It's separated," Filari shot back as though accusing me personally. The heat was inconsistent, amateurish. "Did you tell him that?" He puffed up like a souffle. "Naturally." "And how did he take it?" "He left," Filari said. "Stormed out. It was unbecoming." "Where did he go?" "I am not his valet." "Sure," I said. "But you might have followed him for educational purposes." His eyes narrowed. "Is that an accusation?" "It's flattery," I said. "You seem like a man who enjoys enlightenment." For a moment I thought he'd throw a ladle at me, but he turned on his heel and stalked toward the kitchen. Red herring. Filari's temper was real enough to saute a lesser man, but every twitch screamed ego, not murder. Next, Edwin Kellner, club treasurer. He had the posture of a man who slept with receipts under his pillow. When he shook my hand, he did it like he feared germs, lawsuits, and unexpected invoices. "So," I said, "you and Dervain had a talk." Kellner winced. "He threatened me." "Threatened how?" I asked. "He said he knew money was disappearing from the accounts." Kellner dabbed his forehead with a handkerchief. "He claimed he'd exposed theft." "Was he right?" "No," Kellner squeaked. "Red herring number 2, guilty conscience in search of a crime." I leaned in. "Look, Kellner, I've spent enough time around creative types to know they see phantoms. Dervain probably misread a ledger." Kellner blinked hard. Yes, maybe. "But someone's definitely nervous," I added, "and I'd rather you tell me before someone else tells the police." "Police?" he croaked. "Relax," I said. "I didn't bring any." He sat heavily. He was angry, truly angry, but he left. That's all I know. I filed Kellner under cowardly but interesting and moved on. Mrs. Lenora Dale waited for me in a private salon that smelled like roses and gilt. She was glamorous in the way only old money could manage. Pearls, posture, and a chilly smile. "Mr. Goodwin," she said, "I was told you needed to speak with me." "That's right." I took a chair opposite her. "You argued with Raoul Dervin last night." She stirred her tea. "A private matter." "Everything's private," I said, "until it becomes public." She set her cup down with a soft click. "Raoul and I had a disagreement. That is all." "What kind of disagreement?" A flicker of colour rose in her cheeks. "He refused to assist me with something." "Something culinary?" "No." She lifted her chin. "Something personal." "Are we talking personal as in embarrassing?" I asked, "or personal as in dangerous?" Her lips tightened. "If you quote me, Mr. Goodwin, I will deny it." "Great. Nothing spices up a mystery like the promise of denial." "Mrs. Dale," I said, "Dervane is missing. Maybe worse. A little clarity could prevent scandal." She hesitated, then shook her head. "It was a private matter. I will not discuss it." Red herring or volcanic secret? Too early to tell. As Paige escorted me toward the kitchen, I spotted something on a steel prep counter. A red gold smear no bigger than a fingerprint. Saffron. Fresh. Definitely not part of last night's menu. "Paige," I said, "your tasting banquet didn't use saffron." "That's right." "Then what's this doing here?" She paled. "I don't know. The staff cleaned everything." "Not everything," I said. She shifted nervously. "You think it means something?" "It means someone was handling saffron recently," I said. "And saffron isn't something you scatter like birdseed." She didn't answer, but the way she avoided my eyes said she knew more than she wanted to. By the time I got back to the brownstone, it was 1:47 p.m., late for lunch, which meant Fritz's glare could have singed my eyebrows. He served me quickly, though, probably out of anxiety rather than mercy. When I entered Wolfe's office, he was finishing dessert, a chocolate creation so delicate I half expected it to evaporate if I breathed too close. "Well?" he asked. I gave him the report in full detail. Filari's ego, Kellner's terror, Mrs. Dale's undefined embarrassment, Paige's evasions, and the saffron stain. Wolfe listened, tapping thumb to fingertip. His expression tightened only once, at the mention of the saffron smear. "A stain that does not belong," he said, "a detail out of place. The world is full of such indicators, Mr. Goodwin. They are the breadcrumbs by which fools convict themselves." "Meaning?" He closed his eyes. "That club is a festering broth." "That's practically poetry," I said. "It was not intended as praise." He reached for the bell cord. "Saul." "You want Panzer on this?" "On Kellner," Wolfe said. "Money leaves trails more reliably than chefs." I nodded. Saul Panzer could follow a trail across polished marble. Kellner wouldn't shake him. Before I could reach for the phone, it rang. I picked up. "Goodwin," I said. A familiar voice crackled. Lon Cohen, Gazette reporter, an amateur headache specialist. "Archie, rumour mill's on fire," Lon said. "Half the gourmet world thinks Wolfe is on the case." I groaned. "Tell them Wolfe is on a diet." He barked a laugh. "Too late. Front page gossip already brewing." "Aim it somewhere else," I said. "You know I can't," Lon replied. "But I thought you should know. Eyes are on you." "Great. Just what Wolfe loves." Lon hung up, leaving me with the scent of incoming trouble. I turned toward Wolfe. "Press is circling," I said. He closed his eyes, resigned. "Confound it. Very well. Continue." By the time the next day's lunch hour rolled around, I could tell something was wrong with Fritz before I even crossed the doorway into the dining room. Fritz Brenner is a man whose hands could carve a roast with the serenity of a monk arranging prayer scrolls. So when I saw those same hands trembling around a platter of Sol Veronique, it was as jarring as seeing Wolfe do jumping jacks. The silver platter quivered just enough that the grapes atop the fish wobbled like they were considering escape. Wolfe noticed it immediately. He didn't speak. He didn't have to. His eyebrows compressed by a fraction, and to Wolfe that ranked as a five-alarm blaze. I slid into my chair. "Fritz, if you drop that platter, I promise to tell the press it was an earthquake." Fritz attempted a smile, but it flickered like a candle in a subway draft. "It is nothing, Archie. A little fatigue." "That's not fatigue," I said. "That's a man who read a bad review of his béarnaise." Wolfe cleared his throat in a way that suggested he'd like me silent, preferably anesthetized. Fritz, place the dish and sit if you must. I am all right, Fritz insisted, setting the platter down with exaggerated control. Forgive me, it is only that my mind is not settled. Wolfe regarded him with unusual attentiveness, and if you're not fluent in Wolf-Ann, that means concern wrapped in stony formality. Your composure is compromised, he said quietly. Attend to yourself. Fritz swallowed. Yes, sir. Then he retreated toward the kitchen, shoulders tight enough to snap. Before Wolfe could lift his fork, the doorbell rang, once, sharp as a command. At 1:03 p.m. I glanced at Wolfe. Orchid hours were safely past, lunch underway, so he couldn't blame the visitor for poor timing. He could, however, blame me for everything else. I rose. I'll handle it. The walk to the front hall felt longer than usual, probably because my stomach already wanted the soul. When I opened the door, I found Inspector Kramer planted on the stoop like a storm cloud with a cigar. He didn't look angry. That was worse. Good win, he said, brushing past me. Wolfe in. Of course, I replied. You're here at the worst time for him. Lunch? Kramer grunted. Correct, but I can stall him by screaming fire. Kramer ignored that and strode into the dining room. Wolfe had set his napkin down and was giving Kramer a look that could weigh and price a man's soul. Inspector, Wolfe said with cold civility, your timing is abysmal. My news is worse, Kramer replied. That shut Wolfe up. Kramer stayed standing, which immediately told me this wasn't a friendly chat. His face had the washed-out pallor of someone who's been awake too long with facts he wished were lies. Wolfe, he said, Raoul Devaine's been found. Wolfe didn't move. He didn't blink. He simply waited. He's dead, Kramer continued. Found early this morning in a freezer at the Manhattan Epicurean Circle. Blunt force trauma to the skull. Body was chilled solid. Fritz, who'd reappeared silently with a water pitcher, gasped and griped the tray like he might shatter it. Wolfe didn't look at him, but something tightened in his jaw. That is regrettable, Wolfe said softly. A man of skill. Skill didn't help him, Kramer muttered. He was stuffed behind crates of frozen stock. Probably been dead since sometime last night. Wolfe gestured lightly. Sit, Inspector. A rare offer. A peace branch in a blizzard. Kramer took it, lowering himself into the chair opposite me. He rubbed a hand over his face, then reached into his coat for an envelope. I'm going to show you something. He pulled out a photograph and slid it across the linen. We're not distributing these widely yet. I leaned over. It wasn't pleasant. Devaine's body looked like a marble statue shoved into a storage locker. But what snagged my eye wasn't the brutality. It was a thin, red-gold thread stuck to a ragged tear near his apron's pocket. Saffron. Not the grocery store stuff. High-end. The same colour, the same delicately frayed edge, as the single flake stuck to the tape on Fritz's threatening note. I didn't say anything. I didn't have to. Wolfe saw my reaction. You recognize it? Kramer asked. I do, Wolfe answered before I could. We encountered a similar specimen last evening. Kramer chewed his cigar. Meaning? It is not for casual consumption, Wolfe said coolly, nor for amateurs. I didn't think so. Kramer exhaled. Goodwin, Devane had one hell of a night before he vanished. 3 arguments. Filari, Kellner, and Mrs. Dale. Same trio we heard about, I said. Kramer grunted. I figured you'd been poking around. You're welcome, I told him. He ignored me, which was his way of saying he'd heard it. Kramer cleared his throat. Look, Wolfe, I'm not here to bark. I'm asking you for a clean exchange. You don't hold back on me, and I won't storm in waving warrants. I need every scrap you've got. Wolfe considered him. I shall cooperate, with prudence. That all I'm getting? For now. Kramer didn't like it, but he accepted it. That's the thing about him. He huffs, he fumes, but he stays within the rails. Today he looked like a man walking across thin ice, gruff, tense, but trusting Wolfe to keep the surface from cracking beneath them both. Fine, Kramer said. Then hear this. Devane didn't walk into that freezer on his own. Someone put him there, and whoever did it cared enough to hide him long enough for the body to chill solid. That takes planning. Wolfe nodded gravely. A meticulous mind. And someone with access, I added. That club isn't exactly a public park. Kramer's eyes narrowed. And someone who had saffron. Or handled it recently, I said. There was a stain on a prep counter yesterday. Kramer made a note. Anything else I should know? Plenty, Wolfe said. But Archie will compile a report. I shot him a look. That meant typing, lots of typing, probably before dinner. Kramer rose. Wolfe, I'm giving you room here, don't make me regret it. Wolfe replied with a small, solemn nod. Respectful, professional, no hostility, no theatrics. Kramer tucked the cigar back in his mouth and left without another word. Not storming, just burdened by the weight of a freezing corpse and too many suspects who could afford lawyers. When the front door clicked shut, the dining room felt oppressively quiet. Fritz re-entered, white as a tablecloth. Dead. Raoul Devane is dead. Wolfe finally looked at him. Fritz, you're in no danger here. But, no danger, Wolfe repeated. Archie, see him to the kitchen. I stood and guided Fritz back through the hall. His breath shook as if the air itself had grown too heavy. When he finally reached the kitchen, he steadied himself on the counter. Thank you, Archie, he murmured. But someone sought to threaten me. Now this. We'll handle it, I said. Wolfe's already 5 moves ahead. Fritz managed a nod. I clapped a reassuring hand on his shoulder, then headed toward the back door. Something Kramer had said wasn't sitting right. I stepped into the alley. The noon sun cast sharp shadows between the brownstones. Trash cans lined the fence. A cat eyed me with suspicion. Normal enough. But near the kitchen window, low on the frame, I noticed a thin scrape, fresh, metallic, like a tool or a ring had dragged across the paint. A second scrape ran parallel. Someone had tried to pry the window. Recently. Terrific, I muttered. All we need is a second visitor with better lockpicks. I bent, examined the marks, then stood and brushed dirt off my hands. Red herring or real threat? Hard to say. But in this case, I wasn't betting on coincidence. When I re-entered the dining room, Wolfe was still sitting stiffly, fork untouched. That alone was a sign of a national emergency. Someone's been fiddling with the kitchen window, I reported. Scrape marks, fresh. Wolfe's nostrils flared. Phooey. He pushed back from the table, a gesture so rare it nearly made history. Archie, he said, voice cold as the freezer that held poor Raoul. This violence is rooted in that club. We must strip the bones clean. And that's how lunch ended, not with the taste of Sol Veronique, but with the promise of a reckoning simmering hotter than any kitchen. If you ever want to watch civilized people gnaw each other to the bone using nothing but vocabulary and vintage cutlery, attend an emergency board meeting of the Manhattan Epicurean Circle. By the time I stepped into the Grand Hall at 3:12 p.m., the atmosphere was what you'd get if you mixed a Senate hearing with a food fight and then told everyone to pretend they were cultured. The hall itself was built to give chefs delusions of royalty. Marble floors, velvet drapes, candelabras, chandeliers big enough to crush egos if loosened. Every inch glittered, every face didn't. 50 or so members stood beside linen-covered tables arranged like trenches. Their eyes tracked one another the way wolves watch a limping deer. And because Wolfe never steps foot outside the brownstone, it was my sacred duty to be his eyes, ears, and occasional punchline. Garrison Hudd, the club chairman, spotted me and lumbered over like a panicked walrus in a tuxedo. Goodwin, thank heavens, we're just beginning. From the volume, I assumed you were ending, I said. We must maintain order today, Hudd whispered desperately. This is a dignified institution. At that exact moment, someone shouted, "You liar!" at someone else, and a third person threw a linen napkin with sniper precision. Dignified, I repeated. Sure. Paige Selwood materialized beside us, immaculate as always, but with shadows under her eyes that weren't from makeup. Mr. Goodwin, she greeted, managing a smile that carried more tension than warmth. I see you've arrived in time for the fireworks. Wouldn't miss it, I said. Wolfe insisted I observe this melodrama in person. He didn't specify whether I should bring popcorn. Paige's breath hitched. Please don't joke. Half the room is ready to fracture. Only half, I said. Not bad. She didn't smile. Instead, she pressed her clipboard to her chest and moved toward the dais, where Hudd was trying to shush a thrumming chaos of wealthy gastronomes arguing over who had the most alibi and the least shame. I drifted to the side where the major players had assembled, the suspects, though none of them wore name tags identifying them as such, but their faces gave them away. Marco Filari stood with arms crossed, moustache pointing like accusatory arrows. Edwin Kellner hunched over a leather folio clutched tight enough to strangle. Mrs. Lenora Dale sat rigidly, her gloved hands folded in her lap like she was sitting for a portrait of mild scandal. Paige hovered nearby, watching everything with the precision of a hawk nervously tracking rival hawks. Hud finally managed something approaching silence. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, "we are gathered to discuss a grave matter, the disappearance and death of Chef Raoul Dervan." His voice cracked, not emotionally, more like an overused fork tine hitting china. Before he could continue, the room erupted again. "He was murdered." "Impossible! Someone sabotaged the source. The treasurer stole everything." At that last accusation, Kellner jolted like someone had goosed him. I did not. I'm trying to explain." "Quiet," Hud thundered. The room paused. For 2 seconds. Then everyone resumed whispering at full volume. Paige stepped forward, lifting a hand. "Please, one at a time. We can only resolve this if we treat the discussion with respect." Mrs. Dale gave a brittle laugh. Respect evaporated the moment Raoul publicly humiliated me. All eyes swiveled to her. Even Filari raised both eyebrows, which for him counted as an emotional breakdown. "Humiliated you how?" I asked gently, stepping closer. Mrs. Dale stiffened. "That is none of your concern." "It is, if it's motive." Her chin lifted. "He threatened to reveal something personal, something that need not be aired." She shot a glare at Paige, who visibly flinched. I filed that reaction away with interest. "And what about you, Marco?" I asked Filari. "Yesterday you said the fight was about sauce." "That is correct," Filari growled. "Someone tampered with his marinade, I am certain." He jabbed a finger at Paige. "And she knows it." Paige bristled. "I only know what the staff reported. You cannot blame me for everything." "You are in charge of the kitchen operations," Filari fired back. "No," Paige corrected sharply. "I manage press and public relations. Not sauces, not cooking, and certainly not tempers." Kellner stepped in. Please, there are financial matters we must address. Some of the club's logs appear to be missing." The hall went still. "Missing?" Hud sputtered. "How missing?" "Completely," Kellner whispered. "The folders were emptied last night." Mrs. Dale turned pale. Filari swore under his breath. Paige shut her eyes. In the back, someone muttered, "The thief killed Devane." Another voice countered, "What if Devane was the thief?" Yet another chimed in, "Or maybe he caught someone stealing saffron again." "Saffron," I repeated. Too late. The speaker had ducked behind another member, but the word hung in the air like a spice-laden omen. Paige tugged at her blouse collar. "This is spiraling out of control." "That's why I'm here," I said. "To observe, not to referee, though I can whistle if that helps." She ignored me and signaled for Hud to resume. Hud cleared his throat. "We should remain calm. Let's proceed logically. Miss Selwood, anything to report?" Paige hesitated, then spoke with brittle dignity. "Chef Devane told me privately he intended to reveal a humiliation involving a member. I believe he meant Mrs. Dale." Mrs. Dale gasped. "How dare you?" "I'm sorry," Paige said, voice trembling. "But he said it." Mrs. Dale rose, eyes blazing. "Raoul Dervan had no right to threaten me, none." "Why did he?" I asked. She froze. He believed I owed him something. I don't want to discuss it." Filari rolled his eyes theatrically. "Secrets and sources, this is ridiculous." "Ridiculous or not," I said, "someone sabotaged him. Someone stole logs. Someone used saffron recently." I studied the room. That's quite a grocery list. As if on cue, a silver trash bin near the dais was knocked over by a nervous member. Papers spilled across the floor. I bent to help gather them. One scrap caught my eye. Parchment, torn at the edge, with a hurried scrawl in Devane's unmistakably dramatic handwriting. "Saffron stock, check storage." Well. I slipped on a latex glove I carry for crime scene moments and lifted the parchment, careful not to smudge anything. I didn't remove evidence. I simply held it long enough to read. Then I placed it on a nearby table for all to see. "Anyone want to explain this?" I asked. Filari stepped closer, squinting. "This is Raoul's handwriting." Mrs. Dale swayed and grabbed a chair. Kellner clutched his folio as though it might sprout wings and fly. Paige pressed a trembling hand to her lips. This must have been from last night. Saffron stock, I said. Where is it kept? In private lockers, Filari answered, suddenly nervous. Each chef has one, as do certain members with culinary privileges. Was his locker checked? I asked. Not since the police arrived, Paige said faintly. They sealed everything. Hud slammed a hand on the table. This meeting is no longer productive. We must vote whether to suspend the club's operations temporarily. That set off another storm. Yells, gasps, pleas. A dozen members began speaking at once. I object. You can't shut us down. The press will destroy us. This is a crisis. Chaos. Elegant chaos, but chaos nonetheless. I leaned toward Paige. If someone pulls out a carving knife, I'm leaving. Please don't even joke, she whispered. After 10 minutes of operatic bickering, the vote was held. Hands rose and fell with melodramatic flair. The motion barely passed. The club would shut down temporarily. Hud looked like he'd swallowed a lemon soaked in arsenic. When I finally escaped the grand hall, it felt like stumbling out of a pressure cooker. Back at the brownstone, Wolfe listened while I reported. He didn't interrupt except once, when I mentioned the parchment scrap. Repeat that, he commanded, eyes narrowing. Saffron stock, check storage, I said. His handwriting. Wolfe growled. That meant something. I continued. Filari's accusation, Mrs. Dale's humiliation, Kellner's missing logs, Paige's tremors, the vote, the panic, the whole mess. When I finished, Wolfe leaned back, fingers steepled. Saffron, he said. A coded signal. For what? I asked. Certain rare ingredients stored in private lockers. Among chefs, saffron indicates high-value stock. Someone accessed Devaine's locker. And we know who? No, Wolfe said, but we shall. Fritz appeared in the doorway with coffee. Wolfe waved him off gently. Fritz, you will not return to that club for your consulting engagement. Fritz blinked. Sir, I must. They expect. I will not have you imperiled for their indulgences, Wolfe snapped more fiercely than planned. Fritz went still. Then he nodded slowly and retreated, shaken but relieved. I paused. Wolfe rarely displayed that much raw protectiveness in front of me or anyone. It struck deep. So, I said, breaking the moment, what's next? Wolfe's gaze sharpened. Edwin Kellner. Bring him here, quietly. Discreetly? I asked. Of course, Wolfe said. He is a treasurer. They spook easily. I grinned. On it. Night has a different kind of hush on West 35th Street. Less the romantic sort you read in dime novels, and more like the city holding its breath so it doesn't disturb Nero Wolfe's digestion. By 9:14 p.m., the brownstone glowed through its curtained windows like a fortress lit from within. I led Edwin Kellner up the side path, his soft-soled shoes scuffing nervously at the concrete. He was sweating before we reached the door, which I suppose is what happens when your conscience drips faster than your accounting ink. Mr. Goodwin, Kellner whispered, I don't want scandal. Relax, I said. Wolfe likes scandal. It seasons the air. He gulped. That was a joke, wasn't it? Only if it calmed you down. It didn't. Inside the brownstone office was a cathedral of shadows and lamplight. The desk lamp cast a warm circle on Wolfe's blotter, making him look like a judge waiting to hear a plea. He did not rise when we entered. Wolfe never rose for anything short of assassination attempts or orchid emergencies. Kellner stopped just inside the threshold, hands squeezed together as though praying for absolution. Mr. Kellner, Wolfe said without warmth or hostility, just finality. Sit. Kellner obeyed the way a sinner obeys gravity. He perched on the edge of the red chair like it might fling him straight into perdition. I took my seat at my desk, where a fresh notepad waited. I angled myself so I could catch Wolfe's profile and Kellner's panic in equal measure. It promised to be a long evening, and I never like missing the good parts. Wolfe took a slow breath, a prelude to dissection. You handle the club's ledgers, he began. Yes, Kellner whispered. And the ingredient invoices. Yes. And the private storage accounts. I do the paperwork, yes, but I don't... Kellner, Wolfe interrupted gently. I am not the police. I want clarity, not confession. Kellner's shoulders quivered. I want clarity too. I want out of this nightmare. Then speak plainly. Kellner inhaled shakily. Funds have been disappearing for months. Wolfe closed his eyes. How much? Thousands. I let out a low whistle. That's a lot of saffron. Kellner shot me a miserable glance. Yes, it is. Wolfe's eyes snapped open. Explain. Kellner twisted his fingers. The siphoning was subtle at first. Small increases in ingredient costs. A few dollars here, a few there. But then the invoices for rare spices began inflating drastically. Saffron, vanilla beans, truffle reductions. Luxury theft, I said, with a gourmet finish. It was too consistent to be an accounting error, Kellner whispered. Someone was stealing from the club treasury and covering it under ingredient surcharges. Wolfe studied him. And Raoul Dervan discovered this? Kellner nodded. Yes, he wasn't looking for it. He stumbled across the inconsistencies while comparing batch sizes with invoice quantities. He came to me furious. He said he would expose whoever was stealing. And you thought he meant you, I said. Kellner shuddered. I didn't do it. I swear I didn't. Wolfe leaned forward slightly, enough to impose gravity without effort. Mr. Kellner, I would know if you were lying. Kellner believed that. You could see it. He deflated like a punctured souffle. Who else knew about the ingredient rooms? Wolfe asked. Many did, Kellner said miserably. But one person stood out. Paige Selwood. Paige? I repeated. Miss PR. Kellner swallowed. She's not just PR. She oversees the documentation for special ingredients, labeling, storage logs, supply requests. She was always the last one out after events. On the night Dervain vanished, I saw her leaving the spice storage room. Very late. What time? Wolfe asked. After midnight. What was she doing? I don't know. Kellner wiped his forehead. She said she was organizing inventory sheets, but she had no papers in her hands. That landed like a spice bomb on a hot skillet. Did she see you? I asked. I'm not sure. I don't think so. And you didn't tell the police this earlier because... Kellner looked down. Because I thought she might implicate me. She and Dervain had argued that evening. He accused her of falsifying stock records. Did she admit it? Wolfe asked. No, she laughed, but it wasn't pleasant. Wolfe's fingers drummed once against the armrest. And she was in the room where the saffron was stored. Yes. And you didn't tell Hud? No. And you didn't tell Dervain? He was dead, Kellner whispered. A hush fell. Wolfe let it linger like smoke. This was a claustrophobic scene in all the right ways. The lamplight, Kellner's sweat, the walnut panelling that seemed to lean inward as if eavesdropping. Kellner, Wolfe finally said, you have been foolish but not malicious. Tell me everything else. There's nothing else, Kellner said helplessly. I swear. A red herring or a terrified truth? Hard to say. I leaned back, crossing one leg. One more question, pal. When you say she was leaving the spice room, do you mean the general storage or the private locker area? Kellner hesitated. The private lockers. Well, that was a tasty morsel. Before Wolfe could dig deeper, the phone rang. At 9:42 p.m. No call was innocent. Wolfe flicked his fingers. Answer it. I did. Goodwin, Kramer's voice grunted through the receiver. Don't hang up. Where's Wolfe? In the room, I said, attempting to unravel gourmet embezzlement. Kramer exhaled like he'd been running. Tell him I need an update. One moment. I pressed the mouthpiece to my chest. It's Kramer. Wants to talk. Wolfe extended a hand. I passed the receiver over. His fingers curled around it like a judge seizing the gavel. Yes, Inspector, Wolfe said. I heard Kramer faintly, a low, clipped rumble. Wolfe's responses were calm, terse, and edged with calculation. No, Inspector, I do not intend to withhold. I see. Yes, the saffron appears relevant. No, I will not speculate yet. Archie will send notes shortly. And then, astonishingly, Kramer said something that stopped even me. Wolfe's eyebrows climbed a millimeter. I appreciate your candor, Kramer said, voice grudging gravelly. I'll give you this. You're cutting through this mess faster than my men. Wolfe's lips twitched, approaching a smile but not quite. Thank you, Kramer added, Don't make me regret trusting you. I won't. Click. I let out a breath. Nice to hear the inspector being polite for once. Must be the apocalypse. Wolfe set the phone down and closed his eyes as though storing the conversation in labelled drawers. He is correct. We are making progress. Kellner croaked. What progress? I stood and approached him, hands in my pockets. Let me spell it out. Money's missing. Spices inflated. Devane found it. Someone panicked. Someone with access to the private lockers. Someone who works late. Someone who fought with him and doesn't mind slipping out of sight at odd hours. Kellner shook like a leaf. You can't think. Page wouldn't. I lifted a hand. No conclusions. Yet. Wolfe straightened. Kellner. Yes. You will not return to the club tonight. I wasn't planning to. Good. Wolfe nodded once. You are dismissed. Kellner rose too fast and nearly toppled the red chair. I escorted him through the side hall where he muttered apologies to every shadow. When the door closed behind him, the brownstone exhaled. Or maybe that was me. I re-entered the office. Wolfe was staring at the ceiling, deep in that internal chess game that would eventually trap someone in checkmate. Boss? I asked. He lowered his gaze. Archie. Yes? The motive is no longer theft. Oh? It is humiliation. I blinked. Meaning what? You will know, Wolfe said, when the final piece arrives. And with that cryptic gem, he pulled the bell cord for beer, his version of slamming the book shut on conversation. If there's one thing I've learned in this business, it's that rich people panic beautifully. By the time I stepped into Mrs. Lenora Dale's penthouse at 11:46 a.m., she'd clearly spent the morning deciding whether to cry, confess, or throw herself off her own balcony. The place looked like a museum curator's fever dream, marble floors, gold-trimmed lamps, fresh orchids that probably cost more per stem than my weekly salary. Manhattan glittered beneath floor-to-ceiling windows, flashing a skyline that said, "Money can buy anything except taste." Mrs. Dale herself was perched on a velvet chaise, one hand trembling near an abandoned champagne flute. She looked like a woman trying to pretend everything was fine while her conscience threw a parade. Mr. Goodwin, she breathed, pressing a hand to her chest. I wasn't sure you'd come. I'm here, I said, though the decor is trying its best to blind me. A faint smile flickered, then collapsed. You want to know about Raoul? I do. She curled her fingers together. He wanted to humiliate me. How? Her eyes darted toward the windows. You must understand, I made a private investment with Kellner's assistance. Kellner? I raised a brow. Our trembling treasurer. He doesn't seem like the Wall Street whisperer type. He isn't, she swallowed. Which is why it failed. Spectacularly. I lost thousands. Kellner blamed market timing. I blamed myself. Her voice tightened. But Raoul found out. He said he could save me if I paid him. When I refused, he threatened to expose my foolishness. I couldn't bear it. Blackmail? I asked. No, she snapped too quickly. Nothing so crass. He only wanted to leverage my influence at the club, to advance his standing. Her hands shook. I couldn't allow him to ruin my reputation. Did you threaten him back? She flinched, which wasn't no. Before I could press further, a scream split the penthouse. It came from the hallway, high-pitched, terrified. Mrs. Dale gasped. My maid! We bolted toward the sound. The maid stood in the doorway of the sitting room, hands clamped over her mouth. Mrs. Dale stumbled past me, swayed once, then collapsed onto the polished floor in what I'll generously call dramatic desperation. I dropped to one knee, checked her pulse. Strong. Her breathing? Fast, but steady. This isn't poison, I said flatly. But she fell, the maid stammered. Yeah, I said, and she aimed for the softest rug, convenient choice. The maid blinked. What does that mean? It means, I said, standing, your employer just fainted on purpose. Mrs. Dale fluttered her eyelashes open like a stage actress, making sure the audience was watching. Oh dear, what happened? You took a dive, I said. Not Oscar-worthy, but points for commitment. She sat up, dazed. I felt ill. Sure, I said. Let's stick with that for now, but next time try swooning near a sofa. The marble's hell on vertebrae. Before she could protest, the maid tugged at my sleeve. "Mr. Goodwin, her safe. The door is cracked open." That got my attention. Mrs. Dale froze. "My safe?" We moved to the corner, where a discreet wall panel hung ajar. The concealed safe door was indeed broken open, scraped by a tool, hinge strained. "Who knew the combination?" I asked. "Only me," she whispered. "Uh-huh." I crouched and looked inside. No jewels, no bonds, no emergency cash. Instead, parchments, recipe vouchers, ingredient logs, handwritten notes, all club property, layered like someone had been hoarding culinary treasure. Mrs. Dale lunged forward. "Those are private documents." "These," I corrected, lifting a parchment with gloved fingers, "are stolen club parchments." "No, I only borrowed." "And these," I continued, pointing at a ribboned cluster of ingredient vouchers, "are Devane's, with markings only he used." She swayed again, but I held up a hand. "Don't fool. The carpet already met you once today." Her mouth opened and closed like a goldfish in pearls. Then I spotted it, a small brass locker key, looped on a saffron-coloured ribbon. The exact shade of the flake stuck to Dervane's apron. I held it up between thumb and forefinger. "Recognize this?" Mrs. Dale shut her eyes. Tears, or guilt, threatened. It was Raoul's," she whispered. He trusted me with it once. A gesture, a sign of partnership." Her voice cracked. "I kept it." "But someone broke in and left it behind," I said, "which means someone knew it would incriminate you." "No," she cried. "I didn't kill him, I swear it." "I didn't say you did," I replied, pocketing the key in an evidence envelope. "But you've been stealing recipes, and not the kind you use in the kitchen." She tried rising, but her legs wobbled. It was harmless. Just little borrowings." "Recipes," I said. "Ingredient codes, notes, industrial culinary espionage. That's not harmless, that's warfare." She collapsed back onto the chaise, a queen dethroned. I turned to the maid. "Call a doctor if she actually faints next time." And with that, I left the penthouse with enough evidence to make Wolfe's eyebrows perform acrobatics. Back at the brownstone around 1:02 p.m., Wolfe sat in the office with the kind of stillness usually reserved for statues and men plotting revolution. I deposited the envelope on his desk. "Mrs. Dale's safe," I reported. "Broken open, and inside were the club's stolen parchments, ingredient vouchers, and Devane's private recipe notes. Plus this." I set the locker key on the blotter. "Saffron ribbon included." Wolfe's eyes opened half an inch. For him, that counted as a scream. "Explain." I did. Everything. The humiliation investment, the fake feint, the espionage stash, the key. Wolfe listened without interruption, hands steepled under his chin. When I finished, he spoke with the gravity of a man pronouncing doom. "Humiliation," he said, "is the cord that ties these crimes." "Financial humiliation for Kellner," I said. "Reputational humiliation for Mrs. Dale. Professional humiliation for Devane." "And personal humiliation," Wolfe added, voice low, "for someone else." That one hit differently. I frowned. "Who?" He fixed me with a stare sharp enough to fillet truth. "Not yet," I sighed. "You enjoy being cryptic, don't you?" "It is necessary," he replied. Then serious. "Archie, you are not to confront Miss Selwood alone." That surprised me. "Paige? Why?" "Because," Wolfe said, "impulsiveness is deleterious to your health." That was Wolfe's version of "I care." I didn't push it. "What now?" I asked. Wolfe leaned back, the quiet signal that thinking had turned to planning. "Now," he said, "I prepare the trap." And that was that. Some alleys whisper trouble. The one behind the Manhattan Epicurean Circle practically sang it in falsetto. By 10:11 p.m. the club was shuttered under police order, giving the back entrance all the charm of a mausoleum with delusions of grandeur. The street lamps threw long theatrical shadows across the delivery path, glinting off metal trash cans like props in a third-rate noir picture. The smell of cold grease wafted from the vents overhead, appropriate given the greasy secrets we were chasing. I wasn't alone. Saul Panzer leaned against the brick wall like he'd been carved from it, flat cap low, hands in pockets, looking like a man who knew the answers to questions he hadn't asked yet. Pearly Stebbins stood beside the door, bulldog stance, coat collar turned up. He gave me the look he reserves for small-time crooks and slightly larger-time irritants. "Goodwin," Pearly grunted. "You're late." "By whose watch?" I said. "Yours probably runs on hostility." Saul smirked, a microscopic event, but noticeable if you know where to look. "Kramer said to give cooperation," Pearly muttered like it was gravel in his teeth. "So this is me cooperating." "That's adorable, Pearly," I said. "Shall we hold hands?" He growled, which I took as a compliment. Saul pushed off the wall. "Kellner's alibi checks out," he murmured. "He never accessed the lockers the night Devane disappeared, nor the night he died." "That's solid?" I asked. "Rock solid," Saul said. "I got the logs. Cross-checked them with doorman rotations and external cameras." "Good," I said. "That leaves a shrinking list." Pearly cleared his throat. "And speaking of lists, Paige Selwood's story doesn't hold. She left later than she told us. Much later." I blinked. "Define much later." "Near 2 in the morning," Pearly said. "Witness saw her leaving the South Service stairs. Fast. Head down. Gloves on." "Why the gloves?" Saul asked. Pearly shrugged. "Maybe she was cold." "No," I said. "Paige is never cold. She accessorizes. Gloves mean she didn't want fingerprints." Pearly grunted approval. "Could be." I exhaled. "All right. Time for the main act." From my pocket I pulled the saffron ribbon locker key I'd taken from Mrs. Dale's safe. It glinted softly in the alley light, a tiny piece of brass holding the weight of a dead chef and a pile of lies. Let's see what Raoul Devane thought was worth hiding. Pearly unlocked the back door with his badge authority. We slipped inside, the hallway swallowing us in darkness and stainless steel. The club's kitchen at night felt like a cathedral of knives, quiet, holy, and dangerous if you prayed wrong. The chrome surfaces reflected the faint emergency lights, turning every counter into a razor. Bowls, mixers, racks of gleaming tools, all neat, all cold, as if mourning the man who once ruled them. We moved deeper, past the main prep station and into the secured storeroom, where chefs kept their private valuables. Each locker was built like a miniature vault. Devane stood at the end. I slid the saffron ribbon key into the lock. It turned smoothly. "Moment of truth," Saul whispered. I opened the door. Inside, everything was chaos. The first thing I saw was a recipe book. Well, what used to be a recipe book. Now, it was a massacre of torn pages, shredded and crumpled like someone had taken culinary genius and fed it to a blender. The cover had been slashed, its once gilded lettering gouged out. Next to it lay several shredded financial ledgers, pieces of parchment with ink smears like bleeding wounds. Someone had tried to erase Devane from existence one page at a time, but the real treasure was tucked behind a metal canister of dried sumac. A note, folded, yellowed at the edges, a saffron thread caught in the tape. The handwriting was identical to the note Fritz had received under his kitchen window. I didn't touch it until Saul handed me a spare glove from his coat. With it, I lifted the note just enough to inspect it. Same paper stock, same jagged lettering, same threatening tone. "Serve nothing tomorrow, or the next dish is your last." Pearly swore softly. "Damn, that's murder talk." "It's intimidation talk," I corrected. "The murder came later." Saul leaned in. "Check the tape." I did. Nothing unusual at first, until I brought it closer to my nose. Perfume. Not strong, but distinct. Powdery, floral, with a citrus tint. Paige Selwood wore that exact perfume. I'd smelled it wafting through the club, in Hud's office, on her gloves, on the chair she vacated in the boardroom. "Well," I said, "that's not subtle." Pearly snorted. "People who fake innocence never are." Saul held up a finger. "Before you jump to conclusions, note this. Perfume can transfer by accident, collateral scent." "True," I said. "But on tape adhesive, that means whoever folded this note touched it with perfume on their hands. And who handles paper all day? A PR director who packages press kits." Pearly crossed his arm. "That's motive and opportunity." "It's not proof," Saul replied. "But it's close," I said. Saul looked around the locker. "Anything else?" I checked every shelf, every corner. No more notes, no threats signed in blood. Just destruction and fear, packed tight. "Let's go," I said, "and try not to wake the kitchen ghosts." We slipped out of the locker room and into the silent hallway. The club felt darker now, like the shadows knew we'd found their secrets. At the corner turn, I almost collided with Paige Selwood. She stood rigidly, clutching her handbag. Her eyes were wide, pupils blown, complexion pale under the corridor lights. "Archie," she breathed. What are you doing here?" "Evening stroll," I said. "You?" She swallowed. I left something earlier, in my office." "At 2 a.m.?" I asked. Her lips parted, then snapped shut. A tiny tick fluttered in her cheek. "I don't appreciate being followed," she said. "That makes two of us." "I told Inspector Kramer everything," she added. "I doubt that," I said. "But let's test the theory." I took the saffron ribbon key from my pocket and held it up. She stared at it, not like a guilty person, more like someone staring at a gun they didn't expect to see again. "I've never seen that," she whispered. "Sure you have," I said. "You handled the paper around it." She blinked rapidly. "What are you implying?" "That your perfume is mixed with the tape residue on 2 threatening notes. One sent to Devane, one sent to Fritz." Her breath hitched. "That's impossible." "Not if you tore the pages, folded the notes, packaged them." I stepped closer, or watched someone else do it and got too close. She stiffened. I don't know what you're talking about." Saul appeared silently beside us. "Most people don't sweat when telling the truth." Paige wiped her forehead. "It's warm in here." Pearlie barked a laugh. "It's 50 degrees. I need to leave," she said abruptly. "No," I told her. "You need to talk." She tried to step around us. That was when footsteps thundered down the hall. Inspector Kramer emerged from the main corridor, hat pushed back, trench coat flapping like a weary battle flag. He looked exhausted enough to lie down on a prep table and use a cutting board as a pillow. "Goodwin," he rasped. "Tell me Wolfe has something." I grinned. "Inspector, he's cooking." Kramer scrubbed his forehead. "Then let him finish the damn dish." Before Paige could run or swoon or do her usual theatrical denial, Kramer blocked the exit with a gesture that said cooperation had officially run out of patience. The stage was set. There are few events on Earth more reliable than Nero Wolfe's 8 o'clock dinner. Earthquakes wobble, stocks fluctuate, and people like me occasionally make questionable life choices. But dinner at Wolfe's brownstone is supposed to be immovable. That's why, when 8 o'clock p.m. struck the following evening and no food had materialized, the universe felt slightly off its axis. Again. I checked my watch, then the kitchen doorway, then Fritz. Poor Fritz stood there like a man guarding a vault of secrets. His hands were tight around a silver serving tray. He refused to move an inch past the threshold. "Fritz," I called, "if the soul decides to walk out on its own, we'll blame you." He shook his head. "No dinner, Archie. Not until Mr. Wolfe clears the air." "Is that code for the house is about to explode?" I asked. He didn't answer. He rarely does when he's terrified. In the office, Wolfe sat at his desk with the regal calm of a man ready to preside over a royal funeral. The air vibrated with the quiet hum before a thunderstorm. By 8:03, our guests, or suspects, depending on your optimism, began to arrive. Garrison Hudd, sweating through his collar. Marco Falari, moustache bristling like a cavalry sabre. Edwin Kellner, trembling as usual. Mrs. Dale, pale and brittle. Paige Selwood, trying and failing to appear composed. Saul Panzer, inscrutable. Inspector Kramer, bone-tired but determined. It looked like the world's worst dinner party. When they were finally arranged in Wolfe's office, seated, standing, or hovering, the room buzzed with irritation and dread. I took my usual place beside the Globe bar, notebook ready, as Wolfe lifted one hand for silence. He didn't need to speak. The gesture alone froze the room. "Ladies and gentlemen," Wolfe began, "once again, my household's dinner has been disrupted. I despise disruptions." I resisted the urge to applaud. "Tonight," he continued, "we repair the damage, at least the conceptual damage. The culinary damage must wait." Fritz made a small, wounded sound in the doorway. Wolfe interlaced his fingers. "You are here because each of you holds a portion of the truth. I have pieced these portions together as one assembles a recipe, each ingredient necessary before the dish can be served." Hudd cleared his throat. "Wolfe," Wolfe raised a finger, "you will be silent." Hudd shut his mouth. "Let us begin," Wolfe said. "Mr. Kellner." Kellner flinched. You stole funds, Wolfe stated. Small amounts at first, larger amounts later, masked under inflated invoices for rare ingredients. Kellner sagged. I didn't mean harm. I was desperate. Wolfe waved this away. You are guilty of fraud, but not of murder. Kellner exhaled a shuddering breath. Mrs. Dale, Wolfe said next. She stiffened. Must we? Yes, Wolfe said. You stole recipes, ingredient codes, Devane's personal notes. You used your influence to secure kitchen privileges only to siphon away culinary secrets, presumably to sell or leverage elsewhere. Mrs. Dale lowered her gaze. It was never supposed to go this far. No act of theft ever is, Wolfe murmured. But again, your sins are venal, not mortal. She dabbed her eyes. Wolfe turned his attention to Filari. Marco Filari, you attempted to sabotage Devane's marinade, Filari bristled. He insulted my technique. Your ego is not a defense, Wolfe said dryly, but you are also not our murderer. Filari puffed his chest, as if relieved he didn't need a lawyer. Wolfe shifted his gaze to Paige Selwood. She froze. And you, Miss Selwood, Wolfe said, constructed false alibis, manipulated schedules, and were present in the private locker area long after you claimed to have left. Paige swallowed. I can explain. No, Wolfe said. Your explanations are threadbare. They do not matter. You fear exposure. You fear humiliation. But your actions, though deceitful, do not constitute murder. Paige stared at him, uncertain whether to feel relieved or terrified. Hud raised a hand. Mr. Wolfe, if none of us— Silence, Wolfe repeated. Do not interrupt me again. Hud wilted. Kramer shifted, eyebrows furrowing. Wolfe, get to the point. I shall, Wolfe said. Mr. Goodwin. I straightened. Hand me the final piece. From my folder, I produced the page Saul had recovered, torn from a manuscript, written in Devane's hand. I carried it to Wolfe, who accepted it with ceremonious gravity. He held it up. This, Wolfe announced, is from Raoul Devane's forthcoming book, a tell-all exposé on the Manhattan gourmet elite, a volume detailing corruption, theft, and treachery within your esteemed circle. Gasps. Even Filari staggered. Wolfe continued. Devane intended to expose each of you, your frauds, your manipulations, your ambitions. He did not merely know your secrets, he catalogued them. Mrs. Dale looked sick. Kellner looked ready to faint. Paige took a step backward. This book, Wolfe said, tapping the page, is the key. Devane planned not only to embarrass you publicly, but to destroy reputations, end careers, and seize control of the Circle's culinary future. Hud's face turned crimson. Are you saying he blackmailed us through a book? No, Wolfe said. He prepared to expose you through publication. Murder silenced him before he could. Kramer grunted. Then who killed him? Wolfe let the silence ripen. You all had motives, he said finally. Financial, personal, professional. But only one among you had the combined motives of fear and hunger. Fear of exposure, hunger for power. He fixed his gaze like a spotlight. And only one among you controlled the public image, the messaging, the narrative. Only one had access to the tape, the perfume, the schedules, the press. Only one could stifle the scandal long enough to seize the Circle's future. Paige Selwood swayed. No, she whispered. No, you don't understand. I understand perfectly, Wolfe said. Miss Selwood, you crafted the threatening notes. You accessed Devane's locker. You found his manuscript, you destroyed it. And when he confronted you, you lured him into the freezer, struck him, and sealed the door. Her eyes widened in horror. I never— Wolfe raised his hand. Sit, he commanded. Paige sank into the nearest chair as if gravity had tripled. Wolfe turned to the others. Miss Selwood had long desired to elevate the Circle into a global culinary authority. She controlled the press releases, the promotional material, the public image. Devane's book threatened everything. She feared his revelations would ruin the Circle, and her role as its architect. Paige buried her face in her hands. He said he'd destroy us. Destroy me. I had worked for years to build our image. He wanted to tear it apart with rumors and half-truths. Truths, Wolfe corrected. His manuscript was accurate. She sobbed quietly. Kramer stepped forward, placing a heavy hand on her shoulder. "Miss Selwood, you're under arrest." The room broke into murmurs, shock, sorrow, indignation. Hud sat, head in hands. Filari cursed under his breath. Kellner shook uncontrollably. Mrs. Dale dabbed her eyes. Wolfe raised his hand again. Silence returned. "This," he said, "is the fulcrum on which your fates balance." He let the words settle like dust after an explosion. Then, finally, he sighed, leaned back, and closed his eyes. "Archie," he murmured, "tell Fritz dinner may proceed." I grinned. "With pleasure, sir." Fritz, bless him, vanished toward the kitchen with the speed of a man resurrected. Kramer looked at Wolfe, exhausted, grateful in his own gruff way. "All right, Wolfe," he said. "For once, good work." Wolfe nodded. "Thank you, Inspector." Kramer escorted Page out. The others trickled away, each burdened by their own guilt and relief. When the last door closed, Wolfe opened his eyes. "Archie," he said quietly. "Yes, sir?" "Bring beer," which, in Wolfe's world, was the final blessing on a storm well weathered.